Welcome to Leadership Unfiltered. My name is Anton Gunn, and this is where we break down today's headlines of what's going on in the news and show you how they relate to your workplace and your leadership. And today, we're going to talk about something that's incredibly important that's in the news all day, every day. And that is what happens when HR protects people in power rather than protecting the people in the organization. And I'm talking about nothing other than Sean P. Diddy Combs. Yeah, that Diddy. The music mogul, the hip hop superstar, the brand name Sean P. Diddy Combs that is all over the news for a federal trial that is happening right now in ongoing investigations, lots of litigation into toxic behavior, evil deeds, all kinds of bad things, and most importantly, RICO charges that could put him in jail for a very long time. Now, before you think that this is a gossip episode where I'm just talking gossip, this is not about gossip. This is about leadership. This is about accountability. This is about workplace culture. And this is about what happens when the people around you who are supposed to show leadership and hold you accountable let you do bad things and what becomes of it. So let's get right into it now. So here's what we know. We know that Sean P. Diddy Combs was caught on videotape in a hotel in California, dragging his girlfriend Cassie down the hallway and then unceremoniously beating her for no reason, kicking her, like awful behavior. But what this video began to show all of us that this was a pattern of behavior of Sean B. Diddy Combs, who has multiple record labels. He has a global brand called Combs Enterprises and multiple other subsidiary businesses. Subsequent to that, his homes were raided both in California and Miami. And then the federal government filed charges in court charging him with RICO, which is racketeering and conspiracy and a criminal organization. So the whole context is that they're saying he was sex trafficking, he's doing all kinds of other bad things. So this trial is all over the news today. Now, this is a shock to a lot of us, like me, who was a hip hop fan, who loved the music, the art, and the performance, but had no idea of any of the things that have been alleged going on behind the scenes. So whether it's evil, nasty parties that they call freak-offs, or whether it's, his violent behavior and threats that he made against people in the organization, clearly everybody's now saying that there was one leader who was toxic and bad. But I'm here to tell you that what we're hearing about in the story shows a broader picture of people around him who enabled this type of bad behavior. So I want to unpack a little bit what I have heard quoted in the transcripts of the trial. And it starts with two letters, and those letters are HR. Now, what is coming out from witness after witness on the stands, that as P. Diddy Combs had all of this bad behavior, this awful, evil, nasty behavior, he was basically using his HR department and his HR team as a weapon to threaten people into silence. So stories have come out in the court report that basically said, if you don't commit these sexual acts the way that I want you to, I'm going to get you fired. And I've already talked to HR to prepare to terminate you. So now you have people who are worried about losing their jobs, their careers. And I'm not just talking about a regular job. I'm talking about you being paid by a hip hop mogul that has hundreds of millions of dollars and probably paying you hundreds of thousands of dollars to do a job. And people have been paralyzed in the positions like this. And clearly they've been paralyzed in this case. And so HR is being weaponized to say that HR knows what I'm going to do to you if you don't comply with my bad behavior. Which raises the question, if HR knows that people are expected to do bad behavior, why isn't the HR saying anything or doing anything? Now, it doesn't just end with HR, because there's story after story in the trial and in the transcripts about the chief of staff at Combs' company. The chief of staff, the person who is most trusted in the organization to run the organization, has been said to be the person who tried to pay off the hotel to keep the video silent. This is the person that gets people to comply with the bad behavior when they don't want to comply with the bad behavior. The chief of staff is being talked about as a person who facilitated all of this, that knew what was going on, that talked to the victims in this case, the survivors in this case, and say, yes, I know what's going on, but you got to do what needs to be said. This chief of staff has suppressed bad information. This chief of staff has colluded to keep P. Diddy Combs safe and respected as a mogul and as a businessman, even though all of these things are going on badly. And so this environment is not an environment that anybody wants to be in. It shouldn't be an environment where anybody should have to work. But this kind of environment that we now see on the front page headlines of every newspaper, on every television show, at some point, they're doing a segment about what comes out in this trial. And I am disturbed at how many times I'm hearing HR in the conversation. That this is not one bad person, but this is a culture in an organization with no accountability, no trust, no respect, no dignity, and a whole lot of unethical and illegal behavior that was facilitated by two entities. Entity number one is the Human Resources Department. So whether that's one person or multiple people running a human resource department, that is a bad thing. Number two, the chief of staff, the person who is supposed to be the nerve center, the conduit of all success in an organization, is a person who is enabling and, as I read it, complicit in very bad acts and very bad behavior going on in the organization. So today, we're going to unpack this in really 2 or 3 points. And I'm also going to share with you how you can learn from this, how your organization can learn from this to prevent your organization from being a place where the people in power are protected versus the people who work in the organization are protected. So I'm going to talk about the first point. And this is a question for you. The first point is HR in your organization a safe place, or is it a place that you need to run because you're afraid? So my context for you in this is that HR was not a safe place at Bad Boy or at Combs Global Enterprises or whatever company the HR leader was in. See, this is the context. This was in the trial. I'm going to say these words that P. Diddy Combs said to a person who he wanted to participate in his illegal sex acts. He says, I have HR on speed dial to get you fired. Think about that. If a leader can say, I got HR on speed dial to get you fired, what is that saying about you as an HR leader? That you are a henchman, you are a bully, that you are complicit in doing bad things if people refer to you as someone on speed dial to get you fired. See, HR's job should not be to get people fired. HR's job is to identify top talent, recruit that top talent to an organization, onboard that top talent, help create a great experience for that top talent, and manage the performance and improve the performance of the people in an organization. It is not to be on speed dial to get people fired. That's the first bullet point. Here's another example of why this organization was not a safe place, because the chief of staff was paying people off. That literally, if your HR is involved in settling cases, and what do I mean settling cases? I'm talking to you about firsthand stuff. A lot of times organizations know that they have done something wrong, or a leader has done something unethical, illegal, or outright wrong, and the employee is bringing it up. And so they begin a process of finding a way to settle this so there are no allegations. That includes getting people to sign a non-disclosure agreement. That includes also giving them some level of a payout to go away quietly. Now, before you believe that this doesn't happen, this happens every day in almost every company in America. That literally telling you almost every company signs non-disclosure agreements. And when employees are disgruntled or they've caught something or they have seen something they weren't supposed to see, or they experience some toxic behavior in the workplace and it borders on violating their civil rights, their ethical rights, organizational rights, or just them as a human being, the general counsel in partnership with the HR will find a way to make these things go away. And so in this circumstance with P. Diddy Combs, we're hearing that the chief of staff was the one that was paying people off. And so what this has pointed out to me, that this wasn't a real HR department. This wasn't a real organization. You know what this was? This was one man who weaponized two crucial parts of an organization to facilitate his misconduct. That's what we see. Now, what does that teach us? What does it teach me? And what should it teach you? The simple thing is that power can corrupt systems. Unchecked power can corrupt systems because HR is a system that runs the organization. Not only that, the chief of staff is the conductor of the whole orchestra of how business operates and what gets done. And so in this circumstance, we see that this organization, a powerful organization with lots of money, lots of respect before all of this went down, can easily corrupt systems. And so before you get it twisted and think this only happens in the music industry or this only happens in the entertainment world, I'm telling you right now, this can happen anywhere. It can happen anywhere. And so I'm going to give you a few examples as we go forward of places where similar behavior has happened. So let me get to the next point. The next point I want to point out to you or ask the question, is HR being a shield in your organization or is HR being a resource? See, the reason why I raised that, because in this circumstance, it sounds like HR was being a shield for bad behavior and not a resource to the employees that needed help. Now, before you walk too deep and say this is only in the entertainment industry, I'm going to give you two examples where this has happened in corporate America in real time. Number one is a company called Enron. Now, most of us who are older than 40 plus years old, we remember Enron. It was a large global energy company, the best in the business, doing some of the best things. But clearly, there was some toxic behavior going on around the executive table, cooking the books, if you will, making up balance sheets and doing all kinds of other things that led to a whole bunch of reforms in the accounting industry. But there were people who knew that this was going on. And most of them stayed silent or were forced to be stayed silent by HR or other leaders in the organization. So that's one example. It happened at Enron. Another example that we heard about recently is what was going on in the offices of Uber as it relates to women in the workplace, the mistreatment that existed there. And what did they do? They tried to cover it up. They were shielding the company from the bad press and most importantly, protecting the bad actors in the organization, but they have gotten caught. A third example, just to be very transparent about it, has been the company of Tesla. Several years ago, there was a lawsuit filed in the state of California by the African-American employees at Tesla alleging discrimination and rampant use of the N-word in one of their manufacturing facilities in California. A class action lawsuit. That means all of the employees of African descent who looked like me got together and filed a lawsuit about how they were being treated at work. And that lawsuit had to go to court. But the reason why I had to go to court, because for the years before that, the people in the organization went to HR, went to the leadership to do something about what was happening, and nobody did anything. Instead, they enabled the bad behavior, the poor behavior, and so the only way they could get some relief was to file a lawsuit. So there is the question for you again. Is HR in your organization a resource to the employees in the organization, or is it a shield for leadership to do bad things? I can tell you, after working with dozens of organizations as a consultant and speaking at dozens of HR conferences and leadership conferences, I can't tell you the number of people who come up to me to have a one-on-one conversation to talk to me about the bad things that are going on in their organization. So I want you to understand that this is not just a small thing. It's a big thing, and it happens in a lot of places. So we have to understand that as leaders, we got to stop these things from happening. So the first thing you got to understand, if you want to stop it from happening, if you want your HR to be a resource and not be a shield, you got to prioritize ethics over ego. And in the Sean P. Diddy Combs case, his ego was more important than the ethics of running a good organization. His ego trumped everything else. Is he happy? Does he feel well? Is he enabled? Is he supported? Is he able to do all of these nasty, awful things that we've heard about in these freak-offs? Or is the organization going to protect the employees, create a safe, healthy environment for them to do their jobs, produce, and to help the organization to be successful? We clearly see it was more about ego than about ethics. And that is a failed strategy as an organization. So here's a few questions I want to ask you when it comes to the ego versus ethics, when it comes to HR being a shield versus being a resource. My question for you, do you have a psychologically safe and a physically safe environment for your employees? Or do you have an environment where silence is demanded amongst people who see bad things going down? That's a question for you. Do you have an organization who operationalize anonymous reporting, which is when people see bad things, when they hear bad things, when they know bad things are going on, is there a way for them to report what they see? If there's not a way for them to report what they see, then you have created an environment where you're going to suppress people from telling you what they need to tell you about what's going on in the organization. So you got to create a safe space for people to anonymously report what's going on. So my third question for you is, do you have any kind of measurement system to measure the trust of HR? See, I know in some organizations, I've talked to a lot of organizations who try to pretend that HR is the safe space, the best place for you to go to when you have a problem. But they don't really understand that for many frontline employees, they don't trust HR. I'll give you a quick example of that. I remember working with a client organization that had HR in one building on the left side of campus, and this team worked on the right side of campus. There was a bad manager who did lots of bad things, so many bad things that the employees wanted to report it to HR, but they didn't feel safe emailing it. They didn't have a way to anonymously report it, and they didn't even want to call on the phone because they were afraid that their boss on the right side of campus would see them when they were making the phone call. So they would wait till their lunch break, and instead of going to get lunch, they would walk all the way to the other side of campus to go into the HR office to try to report what was going on. Now, what do I mean try to report? They asked for someone to talk to. Someone came out to talk to them. Someone in employee relations came out and talked to them. They told them all of the nitty-gritty details about what's going wrong in the workplace with the manager and the environment and how bad it was. And they felt safe initially when they were telling their story. Well, they finished telling their story. The HR person, employee relations person says, "Thank you for sharing." And the employee got up and walked all the way back over to the right side of campus. Before they got back to their desk, that HR person picked up the phone and called the manager and told the manager everything that the employees said and alleged in the conversation. So by the time they got back to the desk, this manager was pissed off, angry that the employees went and snitched on him or went and said anything. So what did they do next? They retaliated. So what am I saying to you? If you have an organization that allows those things going on, then you are shielding bad actors rather than creating an environment where HR is a resource. That is the first thing, the first takeaway you need to understand. You can't have an organization like that. So now I want to talk about the second piece. Duana, you need to cut right here. And we're going to go to the second piece. I'm 20 minutes in. Wow. All right. I'm going to go to the second piece and I'm probably going to close after this. Okay. So part 2. So now I want to talk about the second piece, and that is silent power of a chief of staff. See, as I mentioned in my beginning, the chief of staff is a very important role. It's not about just being a calendar coordinator or setting up strategic meetings. The chief of staff is the nerve center of an organization. When I worked for the President of the United States, the president gets to appoint all kinds of cabinet secretaries and all kinds of employees. But the one decision that is most scrutinized, the one that everybody pays attention to, is who is the president's chief of staff. Because the chief of staff is everything. They become the gatekeeper. They're the conduit. They're the ones who knows everything that's going on, and nothing happens if it doesn't go through the chief of staff. But in the case of Sean P. Diddy Combs, his chief of staff was not only the gatekeeper in the nerve center and knew what was going on, his chief of staff was the fixer. His chief of staff was the Winston Wolfe of Pulp Fiction in this story, the person who cleans up the mess. So if your boss gets caught on videotape dragging a woman down the hallway by her hair, kicking her and beating her, and you find out it is on videotape, you go get the video footage from the hotel and pay someone $50,000 to suppress the video, that is bad behavior. And so chief of staff in Sean Combs' organization was not a conduit. This person was an enabler. They were a cleaner, a fixer, someone who sees all of the messy, dirty work, and their job is to clean it up. Gaslight people to make them think it's not that bad. This is horrible behavior, horrible leadership. So when you're out there paying people off or trying to control the narrative and spin it so it doesn't look as bad, even though you know it's bad, this is an awful, toxic behavior. So this chief of staff wasn't managing the environment. This chief of staff was making the environment more toxic for the people there. So this chief of staff became a shield of the bad behavior of Sean P. Diddy Combs. This is not the kind of chief of staff that you need in an organization. See, what people need to understand about a chief of staff has a lot of power. And I mean a lot of power. The power to be able to get things done, to change direction in an organization. So if you're a chief of staff out there, you know the role that you need to play. But if you're a chief of staff who is afraid to check your boss, if you're a chief of staff who's afraid to speak up, a chief of staff who's afraid to be honest about what's going on, you don't deserve your job because you're nothing but an enabler. And that is not what you should be. You should be a person who can mitigate the bias. And what do I mean bias? Every leader is biased to think something. You think some employees are great. You might think other employees are terrible. You should think the company should go to the left, but other people may think the company should go to the right. But the chief of staff should be an objective, independently, non-biased person that can say, you know what? I know you think Mary is not a good employee, but I think she's dynamic and she's an asset. And if you get rid of her, then we're going to have more problems because she is the keeper of the culture in the organization. She's the person that everybody finds value, finds respect, and finds trust in. The chief of staff needs to be that kind of person who can literally hold people accountable, including the CEO. And in the case of Sean P. Diddy Combs, he didn't have a CEO, a chief of staff who could hold him accountable as a CEO. He had an enabler. And that's the worst kind of chief of staff you can have in an organization, is a chief of staff that's an enabler. So you don't need to have this going on in your organization. The chief of staff should be a trusted leadership position that you have empowered to hold you accountable, hold the organization accountable, and facilitate good things happening in addition to setting strategy and framing up the workplace. In this case, Sean P. Diddy Combs doesn't have a good chief of staff. And a lot of organizations have good chiefs of staff, but unfortunately, they also strip power from the chief of staff. They try to turn them into glorified secretaries or calendar setters or people whose job it is just to quelch dissent in an organization. No, the chief of staff should facilitate the success of the organization by being an objective and accountable person. And in this circumstance, there wasn't one that existed in the organization. And the culture began to decline. Which brings me to the third thing that I want to talk about, and that is culture. All right, Dewana, you got to cut again, put my head down between the points. I know we're editing this video, so hopefully we can edit it. All right, I'm going to get to the last point, and then I'm going to be done here in the next 10 minutes, okay? Or not, I say next 10 minutes. It really is much more than 10 minutes, okay? Much less than 10 minutes, okay? 3, 2, 1, action. Culture starts at the top, but it shows up at the bottom. See, a lot of people want to say that the culture of an organization starts at the bottom with the employees, how they treat each other and how they engage. I believe that everything in an organization rises and falls on leadership. So if the CEO is carrying out bad behavior or tolerating bad behavior, then the bad behavior is going to become the culture of the organization. So you cannot let misconduct go unchecked. And in the case of Sean P. Diddy Combs, he was the evidence of misconduct. He was the arbiter of bad behavior. He was the originator and the organizer of unethical acts, illegal acts, dangerous acts, all kinds of things. And the organization's culture reflected that. Power can corrupt, but I absolutely know that absolute power absolutely corrupts. And so it metastasizes in an organization when you have that level of corruption. It really is like a cancer. Cancer can start with one person, but it can spread very quickly in the organization. And that's what you have in the circumstances in the case of Sean P. Diddy Combs. This culture was rotten to the core. And you can read the transcripts and hear the conversation in these articles that everybody knew what was going on. And they were either paralyzed, powerless, or participants in the bad things happening. I mean, the number of witnesses, one guy's code name was the Punisher. His job was to come in and do bad acts and bad behavior. This is a problem of culture in the organization because that person didn't get there by herself. Somebody had to pay his check. Somebody had to call him on the phone. Somebody had to tell him what was on the agenda. And then he had to show up and do the bad things. So this is what a toxic, awful, hostile culture looks like. And it doesn't start at the bottom. It starts at the top, but it shows up at the bottom. So let me ask you this about your organization, ask you about your company. If I was to sit down and interview an employee who has only been on the job for 90 days or less, how would they describe the culture? Or if I was to go talk to an employee who's been on a job for 25 years and ask them to describe the culture, how would they describe it? If both of those people don't talk about your organization in the same way, you got culture problems. Now, what do I mean you got culture problems? See, a 90-day employee should be able to say, and this is what my specific question would be, hey, employee, you've been there 90 days. If you see something that you disagree with or that you think is wrong, do you feel safe that you could speak up and tell somebody what you don't like? If a 90-day employee doesn't feel safe to stand up and say what they don't like, you got a culture problem. And if I ask that same question to someone who's been there 25, 27, 29 years, and they're like 1 year from retirement, and they say, well, why would I ever speak up? I'm not trying to mess up the fact that I got 1 more year before I retire. I can't tell you the number of client organizations that I start off working with that when I do an interview with an employee, they literally say stuff to me like that. They say, well, the reason why I'm silent is because I just got 1 more year to retire. I just want to be done with this place. I'm not doing anything to jeopardize my retirement, my position or my promotion. They say all kinds of things. That lets me know that you have a bad culture in the organization. So here's what I want to close with. I want to close with the following. Whether you got an HR department who is shielding people versus being a resource, or a chief of staff who is an enabler and a fixer to support the toxic culture, or if you just got a generally bad culture that is full of malfeasance and corruption and misconduct, I want you to know that accountability is not optional, that you must create an accountable culture in your organization. An accountable culture is not a PR problem, okay? When you got bad culture, it's not about PR. PR is what the news headlines say. Everybody doesn't want the news headlines. So it's not a PR problem. It's a character problem. It's a values problem. So let me give you 4 things that you can do that you need to understand right now so that you can address these things if you have them happening in your organization. Number 1 is that no leader should be above evaluation. As a matter of fact, every leader needs to get a 360 evaluation at least every 3 years. Some organizations may do it every year because things change every year. So if employees don't feel safe to tell the truth about what is going on with a leader in the organization, you need to fix that. So 360s are a part of it for every leader in the organization. The second thing that's a part of it is making sure that you have an anonymous reporting structure internally in your organization that people can report bad behavior when they see it. You also need to be measuring whether your HR department is trusted. So asking some simple questions, a Likert scale system of asking, is HR a trusted body in this organization? Strongly agree, neutral, slightly disagree, strongly disagree. You can find a way to make it simple and easy and ask that for employees to be able to know whether the organization is a safe place, has HR as a safe place for them to go and report things. Now, the third thing, I want to go back on culture, that I want you to understand that I have spent the better part of the last 25 years showing organizations how to build a world-class workplace culture. And there are several different dimensions that make up a world-class workplace culture. And one of them is being clear and succinct about how you acknowledge and apologize for the things that you do wrong. If you have an organizational culture who does things wrong, and when you see them, you catch them and you clean them up, but you never acknowledge that, hey, we found something wrong in our organization and I want to apologize for it, you can never build a world-class workplace culture in that way. So you always have to be held accountable, acknowledge what you know, and most importantly, apologize to those who were done wrong. Now, when I say apology, it's not just an apology in words, that you may have to do whatever it takes to make it right. So whether that is, compensating people and giving some aspect of reparations to make it right, or whether it is to terminating the bad actors who committed those bad acts to create a right environment for those people who were injured to stay, you have to do the things that you don't want to do. That's how you build a world-class workplace culture. So here's what I'd like for you to do as I close. If you thought this video was valuable to you and your team, your organization, I want you to hit that like button. I want you to hit that share button and send this to somebody who needs to hear it. But more importantly, I want you to put into the comments what bad behaviors you will not allow to go forward in your organization? What are you willing to do to report it? And if you're not willing to do what it takes to report it, then I want you to tell me in the comments why. Tell me what's going on in your workplace that you don't feel safe and secure to be able to report the wrongdoing that you see. But what we can't do is allow organizations to emulate the bad behavior of the Combs Global Organization, Bad Boy Enterprises, or anything that has Sean P. Diddy Combs as CEO. Because what we've all heard in the news is disturbing and it's got to stop. I want to thank you for watching. See you next time for Leadership Unfiltered. Take care.